Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Pulse Canada webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about pulse ingredients in bakery applications. My name is Julianne Curran, and I'm the Vice President of Market Innovation at Pulse Canada, and will be your moderator for today's webinar. I'm joined today with our three expert presenters. We have Tanya Durr, Director of Diversification and Market Insights at Pulse Canada. Tanya is going to be talking about all of the latest innovations and market trends related to pulse ingredient use in bakery. And we also have Janelle Carlin, who is Director of Quality and Processing at Pulse Canada. Janelle will be talking about all the latest research on functionality of pulse ingredients in bakery applications. And we are also joined by Mineka Malagoda, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Food and Human Nutritional Sciences at the University of Manitoba. Mineka will be presenting a case study on pea protein in whole wheat bread application. So before I turn it over to our expert speakers, I just want to remind everyone that we will have about 10 minutes at the end of today's session to take some questions. So please enter any questions that you have throughout the presentations in the Q&A box. And also, when you see a question that you're also interested in from another listener, please upvote that question, and then we'll know if we're running short on time, which questions are of most interest to all of you. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tanya Durr to kick things off.
Great. Thank you, Julianne, for the introduction. And today we're going to talk about pulses in bakery. Bakery is one of the most important industries to exist. It's a staple food that nourishes us globally. And so any developments in this category can have a ripple effect across the industry. So today I will start off the webinar providing that landscape of the category. I will show where pulses fit within this landscape, and then I'll follow with the global innovations in the commercial space. So the global bakery industry is a very large industry. I'm just going to go back one more here. It's a $507 billion industry. It's forecasted to grow at a CAGR of 4.4% over the next 5 years. Breads make up more than half of that value, as you see at the top of the left there, and followed by cakes and pastries. Desserts, pies, and frozen bakery are also important segments that are a little bit smaller, but they are growing year on year, particularly with increasing interest in better-for-you indulgent products. So we're going to look at some trends for bread specifically. This graph here shows year-on-year growth since 2010 for both flatbreads and leavened breads. And so volatility is nothing new here to the bread industry. The impacts of gluten belly in 2014, the COVID impact saw a drop as well. We're going to fast track to 2024. Good news is that we're back at modest growth levels, and there's a little bit slower growth forecasted in the pan bread sector. So that's the orange line due to the low carb diet trend. But the flatbread is forecasted to continue its steady climb back to pre-COVID levels, and that's the blue line. So overall, very positive growth expected, particularly in flatbreads. So the bakery does endure a lot of volatility, and right now is no exception with rising egg prices. So in March 2025, U.S. egg prices increased over 100%, so 108% compared to the same time last year. And this impacts a range of bakery products that depend on eggs for functionality. And so this graph on the left shows the percentage of launches that contain eggs or egg products. So that's egg whites, yolks, egg powder, those type of ingredients. And on the top there, mayonnaise is not a bakery product, but it's a great benchmark showing that 89% of mayo launches contain eggs. And so when you compare that, looking at cakes, pastries, sweet goods, at 76% of new product launches containing eggs, frozen desserts, sweet biscuits or cookies, as well as chilled desserts, sandwich wraps. All of these rely on eggs Rising egg prices are not a new thing in the bakery industry, but the bakeries do need to adapt, and to particularly this volatility and this instability here. So another trend is on sustainability. So the claims around sustainability is growing in the bakery sector. This here is also the percent share of bread launches that contain some type of sustainability claim, and it went from 6 to 8% in the bread category over the last 5 years. In cakes, it went from 9 to 16% share of launches, and 7 to 12% for bakery ingredients and mixes. So this increase in sustainability position is a positive thing, and the UK brand this is Wild Farm that is pictured on the right, is taking quite a transformative approach focused on regenerative agriculture and partnering with retailers such as Marks and Spencers and others to have a stronger environmental impact, and working together with different partners to expand accessibility to their followers in this case here. Now, similar to the previous slide, so protein and fiber continue to be relevant. And similar to the last slide, this graph here shows percentage of launches with protein and fiber claims. So overall, there's high penetration of fiber claims, particularly in crackers and breads. And protein may not be as common as these fiber claims globally, but it might not also be explicitly positioning the protein, but it's still quite relevant. So bakery companies are leveraging a lot of these claims nutritionally and from a sustainability standpoint. Okay, so then we're going to now look at how pulses fit into this landscape. So why pulses? We have lots of good reasons. There's nutrition, health, clean label. These are the usual suspects. Sustainability as well, I just mentioned. Pulses have a great story to tell with their low carbon and water footprints. And versatility is key for companies seeking multi-purpose ingredients, not only to achieve clean label and functionality, but it also allows them to extend these ingredients to a broad usage scenarios, whether it's making cookies or crispy crackers, cakes, or simply just a bread with good low volume. And then lastly, pulses have a continuous stream of supply. It's a global crop. It's relevant to many regions, and consumers recognize pulses. So that's definitely a plus. There's an awareness and acceptance of these crops. Now, when we talk about pulses, I just wanted to show that there is a diversity of pulse types. These include dry peas, lentils, chickpeas, dry beans, and faba beans. They are a legume, and they can be cooked and consumed in their whole seed format. Or in the case of bakery products, they can be milled into a flour or a paste, or separated into their protein, starches, and fibers. So there's lots of options to choose from for functional performance, and Janelle will be talking about this. But this is just really to show that there's a lot to choose from. Now, I wanted to just show how it's fair. These pulse ingredients are faring in the industry. So this graph here shows the evolution of pulse ingredient usage in bakery sector over time, and we call this new bakery launches in the packaged food sector. And these are some of the top pulse ingredients found in these products, in these bakery products. So the top ones really are pea protein. There's different like chickpeas and chickpea flour, as well as a variety of beans. So kidney beans, there's some red and white beans as well. So what we see here is just a natural growth trend for most of these pulse ingredients, but then you start seeing pea protein that's in the blue. It's really just emerging from virtually nothing to become a more commonly used ingredient within just the last 10 to 15 years. So what we just saw was total launch activity, so different products being launched in the market. This one here is looking at total. Actually, this one here is looking at the penetration of pea protein in bakery, and it's in comparison to other protein ingredients such as soy, rice, potato, and corn. And so today, pea protein, it has emerged as a common protein ingredient, and it's found in 1% of all new bakery launches in the world. So it's still relatively niche, but it's making its mark in the bakery industry. Now, in addition to protein ingredients, the pulse flours are also very important. And so the most commonly used pulse flour in new product development is from chickpeas. This table shows over 5 years of bakery launches with pulse flours in different regions. And now, while chickpeas are most common across the globe, Europe is quite active in their use of all pulse types. So not just chickpeas, but also peas, lentils, fabas, and bean flours. And so this is looking at the regions. My next slide here is going to look at the type of application, so the different bakery segments. So here we have bread and bakery in mixes. They are the top applications overall. And then there's cookies, crackers, and cakes and other sweet goods. They're also relevant. And really, just these two last slides here just show the penetration of pulse flours in the bakery industry overall, and then it's also demonstrating the universal appeal given its presence in bakeries all around the world. Okay, so before moving on to the the last part of my presentation, I wanted to draw attention to a consumer study that we did recently, just last year, focused on pea protein consumption trends in the US, the United States. So we surveyed consumers on their openness to pea protein, but it's in the context of a range of food applications. So this graph is a bit busy, but it's showing current use. So if you look at the horizontal line, it's current use or demand, and then on the vertical, it's the consideration to consume these products. And this positive shading in the gray shows that there's a strong relationship between usage and consideration. So in other words, products that you may be currently consuming are likely to be purchased in the future. And so the foods that are listed in the top right quadrant are applications that have high usage or consumption and high consideration. So you're going to repeatedly buy these products and consume them. So pastas and salty snacks with pea protein are great examples of this, and those are in the top right quadrant. But most interestingly is that the future trends also reside in flatbreads, and so I highlighted them here. Sorry. And so you see the flatbreads there. It's high. It's showing that there's high consideration, and it's about in the middle of the graph, and so it's showing medium level of current usage. So that's flatbreads. And then if you also look at the left there, there's the bread, just traditional regular bread. It's on the top left quadrant where there's high consideration for this leavened bread, but there's low current usage. And so because it's more on the left side of this graph. And so what this really indicates is that there's potential opportunity to fill a gap in the market. Okay, so as these trends change, we're going to start seeing new products following suit. And so this brings me to just the last few slides here, just highlighting some of these commercial launches. So last year, we really saw an increase in bakery launches with a pulse ingredient, and this is just across the global landscape. There are, on the slide here is just a few of them. We have lots of high protein wraps made with a blend of different cereal grains. And this one here on the left is made with rice and pulses, both peas and chickpea protein. It packs in 12 grams of protein per wrap, and it uses the pulse and cereal blend, leveraging both the protein content and the quality, but it also gives it that gluten-free status with the use of that rice with pulses. The middle is a wheat flour, so it's not gluten-free, but it leverages both protein and fiber. And then the one on the right is a keto bread, and it uses fiber, and it packs in that 7 grams of fiber. So these products show that you can you can pack in the benefits there into a loaf of bread or a flatbread. One trend in the market is that a lot of our favorite bakery items are going bite size. So whether it's bagels, naan, or pita bread, companies have miniaturized these staples for convenience and portion control. So it can also cater to those that are more health and weight conscious, including those with GLP-1 medications, for instance, but also tapping into that snackification trend that we're seeing. So it's an interesting trend because this is where pulses are showing up, providing that nutrition, but also that functionality. And in some cases, these are really crispy products too, so it adds texture. And then here are some products containing the pulse flours in the context of egg-free positioning. So this biscuit on the top there is from Switzerland. It's candied orange peel with a blend of almond and chickpea flour. There's hot cross buns from Australia. That's faba beans and just a pancake mix here with chickpea flour. And so it's really targeting opportunities with those with allergies to egg, those seeking more simple labels that maybe are more minimally processed. And then there's that sustainability impact given that pulses require low carbon and water requirements to grow in the field. So these kind of products provide that functionality and a good story to tell as well. Okay, last but not least, this is just one more example of a sugar cookie mix that contains upcycled pea starch. Explicitly says it on the label there in combination with okra flour, which is also an upcycled ingredient. So just an interesting example of a product that it's a cookie mix that empowers, it says here, it empowers the customer to fight climate change from their kitchen. So they're really trying to be unique in their positioning and encouraging those to choose upcycled products, and it can help to reduce global food waste, leading to it's a leading driver of climate change and saves valuable natural resources. Is what it says on pack. So those are kind of conclude some highlights of different products in the market that feature pulse ingredients in bakery. And so to just summarize, the bakery industry remains resilient. It has to be resilient during this time. Pulses demonstrate commercial versatility in bakery, which you're going to hear more about. And then this is a really opportune time because consumers are ready for pulses in these bakery applications. So with that, thanks for listening. And I'm going to now pass it on to Janelle Carlin, who's going to cover some of the functionality aspects of pulses in bakery. So Janelle.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Tanya. All right, so I'm going to be diving in and providing an overview on some of the research on functionality and performance of pulse ingredients across bakery categories. So I won't spend too much time on this because I think it was very well demonstrated in Tanya's presentation, but no surprise, a big driver and rationale for the use case of these ingredients is because of the nutritional value that they bring to the table. So a single serving of pulses can contribute to fiber, protein, and several different micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. So that makes them a well-suited choice for products that are striving to improve their nutritional density. This is just demonstrated here. So this was a study that Pulse Canada had collaborated on a couple years back. We're looking at reformulated cereal-based products and the impact that reformulation has on the nutritional density of products. And this is qualified as a nutrient balance score, which considers nutrients that are generally healthful. So things like protein, fiber, the vitamin and mineral density, and receives a lower score for nutrients that might have more of a negative impact on health and nutrition. So things like sugar, sodium, and total fat content. And you can see here just the significance of the impact that pulse ingredients can have on improving the overall density of these products. Another benefit as well is that pulse crops are a low glycemic food, and you can have some impacts in bakery products by reformulating. So this is just one study which looked at incorporating 16% dehulled green lentil flour into a focaccia bread application and measured both the in vivo and in vitro glycemic impact. And you can see that just this reformulation was able to allow for that focaccia bread to meet low glycemic index, that lower than 55 threshold, through reformulation efforts when it was measured in vivo. Again, this was a little bit touched on by Tanya, but another consideration can be the ability for the incorporation of these ingredients to help with the overall carbon footprint of these products. So because of their low production footprint, a lot of the ingredients, some of those benefits can also be realized in these reformulated products. So just highlighting that same study, where we were looking at the nutrient balance score, you can see the impacts that reformulation has on reducing the kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of food. So overall, pulses are a very good tool to offer meaningful nutrition and sustainability benefits. However, when we're looking compared to traditional products, this is sometimes met with a decrease in quality. So particularly wheat-based products, you're disrupting that gluten network, resulting in physical interference. In gluten and gluten-free systems, there's a high water absorption capacity for these ingredients. So this may limit free water in the system, which can restrict and delay hydration of starch granules that are important for texture and dough development and during the baking process, and then also can increase the viscosity of the dough system. So particularly for products which are relying quite heavily on leavening and that gas expansion, that can sometimes be restricted when you're incorporating these ingredients into systems. So what this typically might display as is doughs can sometimes get sticky and extensible. You tend to see a little bit more color development just because of the protein content of these ingredients in the Maillard reaction. So darker crust, there can be some tints and hues in the crumbs, smaller, low volume, sometimes harder textures, and then there are known to be some undesirable flavor and aroma notes that can arise for some of these ingredients. So what I wanted to talk about more so today is that with the intention of increasing nutrition and helping with the sustainability footprint, how can you optimize quality? So help to alleviate or mitigate for some of these losses in quality that might be experienced when you're looking to formulate a bakery product with a pulse ingredient. So there are a handful of considerations in selecting the ingredient initially. So pulse type being one of them. Not all pulse types are the same. They perform differently. A good example is just simply in the flavor. So something like a chickpea might have a little bit more caramel notes to it. So it might be a little bit better suited to something like a sweeter application versus something like a lentil. They tend to have more peppery notes to them. So more of a savory style product. They tend to work a little bit better in. The ingredient format itself is something, obviously the cost is a really big consideration there, but there's going to be differences in composition, which will impact the nutritional profile and then also has an impact on functionality. And then the physical properties, the structural properties of that ingredient that are changed and modified during processing, those impact how these ingredients work in the system. And then there's also several different commercially treated ingredients, so things like roasted, pre-cooked, heated. Those are just some examples on this slide. And what this does is the treatment itself might cause some changes to the structures of the components in the ingredients, so that can alter how they might perform, and then also alter the flavor profile of the ingredients. So just some important things to consider in what you're wanting to start with as a pulse ingredient. Here I've just highlighted just some examples of general ranges and compositions for different ingredient categories that are available in the commercial space. So really taking into consideration if the nutritional density and the nutritional offerings are something that you're looking to formulate for, then that's something that's helpful to use in the back of the mind as context when you're looking to select a specific pulse ingredient. So just wanted to highlight what that means here. So here, just using protein content as an example, you can see differences in how these different types of ingredients might, at different inclusion rates, affect the protein content. So here, between a flour, a protein concentrate, and a protein isolate, obviously it's getting more expensive with the higher purity levels, but you also need less of it to reach a certain protein content in formulation. And something that's beneficial here, and we're talking about cereal-based products in the bakery category especially, is that because of the complementary nature of these proteins, you're not only increasing overall total protein content, but because improving the protein quality, which increases the amount of protein that's eligible for a claim. So here I just highlighted the inclusion rate across each of these different ingredient types, where you can double the protein content that's eligible for a nutrient content claim, compared to a product which would have 100% hard wheat flour. So you can see the differences in the inclusion rates that you might need to meet those nutrition goals. And again, you might want to consider what's the nutrition goal, what's the cost of each of these ingredients, and then also how they might perform differently at those various inclusion rates. One thing I did want to highlight here, particularly important for flours from pulses, is that particle size is something that consistently pops up as having an impact on performance in bakery. So a couple of the reasons why is that as you get to a more fine granulation, you can have more starch damage that occurs. So that will physically break up that granule structure, and allow it to have a little bit more easier time absorbing water. It might increase hydration rates slightly. But when pulse crops specifically are ground down, they tend to filter out into two peaks in a bimodal distribution, that matrix, where there is a larger peak that's associated with coarse particles. So those coarse particles are starch granules that are physically entrapped within a matrix of protein and fiber. And this is something that's important, because they're physically entrapped, that can restrict starch granule swelling. It has an impact on the hydration kinetics of these flours. And that's something that is very meaningful and has a pretty significant effect when you're looking to create doughs and then bake those into products later. So just something to watch out for, as something to look at when you're formulating a baked product from Pulse Ingredients. So this is just a visual example of how this can have an effect. So this was a study which looked at 20% incorporation of different pulse flours that were ground to different granulation levels, where here a more fine flour was associated with a softer bread spore. However, you can see that when you look across pulse types, it wasn't necessarily the same effect for the different particle size for each pulse type. So that's something that you might have to uniquely evaluate for pea ingredients versus lentil ingredients. And that was also demonstrated here. So this was another study which looked at the effect of particle size on cookie attributes for cookies that were formulated with pulse flours, where here coarse flours were found to result in softer cookies. So there's differences across different product categories. Particle size itself had an effect on the weight, the thickness, width, texture attributes of the cookies, where again, there was a difference in how pulse types specifically and particle size interacted. So a significant effect of the interaction. And then inclusion level, again, they might not always act the same at differences as inclusion levels, where when you have lower inclusion levels, the effect of particle size might not be as significant as it is when you have a higher inclusion level for that pulse ingredient in application. The last thing I just wanted to highlight here in terms of looking at the pulse ingredient selection process is some of those commercial treatment options that are available. And really just more so wanted to highlight that there are quite a bit of successful commercial treatments that can really help to improve some of those undesirable flavors that are associated with pulses. So this is just one study which looked at RevTech, which is a heat treatment process. And when it was applied at the same time as a 10% steam treatment, that hydrothermal treatment was able to significantly reduce some of those pea notes that might be considered undesirable in a pan bread that was formulated. So just wanted to call that out, as there are a lot of successful products that you can then either get very good sensory attributes for products that are reformulated, or they can help to push inclusion rates a little bit higher because you don't get as significant some of those significant losses in the sensory profile of products. So some solutions then, outside of just properly selecting the right ingredient, there are some solutions in terms of optimizing the formulation or the process for bakery products that can also improve the quality. So on the formulation side, inclusion rate is probably the most significant factor that will determine the quality for a product that contains pulses. If you are struggling and having some issues with in gluten systems, using a higher dose strength flour or inclusion of vital wheat gluten is something that can really help. Other things like dose strengtheners, conditioners, hydrocolloids can also help to maximize that product quality. Specifically for some of the textural issues, if it's resulting in a little bit too hard, the addition of fats into the system can help to soften the texture. And then there's some masking ingredients that at low levels can really help to with some of those sensory notes that might be undesirable. So the addition of things like malt, molasses, honey. On the processing side, to aid with some of the dough handling, optimizing the water addition level, extend the mixing times at lower speeds. That's something that can really help to get that dough sufficiently hydrated, just given that there's a little bit more competition for water in the matrix. And then baking at longer for lower temperatures is something that can help to control the color development in the finished product. So here I've just highlighted, this is just an example for pan bread because it is the most studied application, where you can see just some references for inclusion rates for some of these different additives that can be added in formulation, reference for what kind of hydration rates we've seen across studies. And then in terms of inclusion rates, there I've highlighted where studies have been able to get a successful product with minimal differences relative to a wheat-based control. At what inclusion rate does that happen? So for protein ingredients here, it's around kind of 5% or less. Fiber fractions, native flours, maybe 15% or less. And then by having a thermally treated flour, you can get a little bit higher just because there's less of an impact on that sensory some of the sensory attributes for those products. So if you're interested in anything like this for other styles of products, it's something we can definitely help to provide. I just wanted to highlight here, not all products are the same. So pan breads obviously they rely very heavily on that fermentation process and that aerated structure to really create that crumb. So it's a lot more difficult to get higher inclusion rates in the product versus when you're getting into some of the other categories that might be chemically leavened, where leavening isn't as high of importance in the product quality, then you can get higher inclusion rates. So there are very successful products that have been made for things like flatbreads, tortillas, and pitas, which do not need that high volume structure. So you can really reach quite high inclusion rates for those types of product categories. And here I just wanted to highlight, over the years, Pulse Canada has collaborated with several different teams just to make proof of concept prototypes, leveraging Pulse ingredients. I've just highlighted a couple photos here just to demonstrate that there are some quite successful products that are really tasty that can be made. Inclusion rate being one of those most important factors, where if you don't try to stretch it too much, you can really have quite a tasty product. So here I just wanted to demonstrate some trials. So these were conducted at Cereals Canada's pilot bakery, where just to show the power of adjusting some of those formulation and process parameters on improving product quality. So from left to right, that's trials 1 to 3, where the trial 1, some of the notes from the baker here is that the crust color might have been a little bit too dark. Here they noted that the proof times were taking a little bit too long to be practical. So for the second trial, to help to reduce the crust color, the baking temperature was lowered, the time was extended slightly, and then more yeast was added into the formulation. So to try to shorten the time that that dough needed to proof to get that same increase in volume. So here you can see that effect that it had in that bread that's shown in the middle slide. Here, then there was still some issues with the dough being a little bit gassy and resistant, so it had to drop that yeast back down to about 4.5. And then in that final trial, this was where the final product was considered acceptable. It had good dough characteristics, good volume, good color. So a similar example, this is now pushing a little bit more of a higher inclusion rate. So this is looking at a dehulled red lentil flour. Where here, a couple of the comments were that the dough was drying up quite quickly during rounding and dividing. So that was something that was flagged as an issue for processing. You can see that it didn't rise very well. There's a bit of an uneven shape and a very dark crust in the crumb. So here, increasing the gluten content, so that's trying to help a little bit with some of the structural integrity, and increasing the water addition level to help with, again, some of that texture, softness, and handling properties. That second trial dough was quite strong, so the addition of gluten helped, but they still found that it dried up quite quickly, and had a little bit more of a low height, and still low volume after baking. So what was done then was increase the water addition one more time, increase the yeast level, and then both of those adjustments helped to really improve the volume, as well as the handling ability for that dough. So you can just see how significant of an impact those adjustments can have. I did want to call out in the research space, there's been a lot of work that's been done looking at sourdough fermentation, so either spontaneous fermentation or specifically inoculating with strains. I've highlighted some of the strains that have been evaluated here, so these are either bacteria or yeast. Overall, what the research is noting is that this fermentation has been quite successful in reducing some of the anti-nutritional content that might be present in pulse ingredients. It helps to increase soluble fiber, free amino acids, and increase protein digestibility. Because of the formation of acetic and lactic acid, this can help to inhibit mold formation for a little bit longer of a storage period, and helps to improve product quality. So for wheat-based systems, this is really flavor and crumb structure, but in gluten-free systems, this is noted as improvements in loaf volume, crumb texture, and helping to reduce staling in products that are fermented, those pulse ingredients that are pre-fermented with the sourdough approach. So some of those trials that I highlighted in adding that vital wheat gluten is something that works very well to help with the product texture, but in gluten-free products, obviously this isn't an option. So I've just highlighted across some studies here, just some examples of ways that an increase in product quality has been realized. So the addition of other ingredients, things like xanthan gum, proteases, dextrins, have helped. Looking at tortilla applications, there was one study which looked at the combination of a corn and a pea protein isolate under alkaline conditions that actually really helped to create a viscoelastic structure that was the most comparable to a dough that had gluten in it. And then also some looking at just different alternatives to baking, to the conditions to help to optimize quality there. There are a couple of other studies that going beyond nutrition now are trying to, is there a functional advantages that some of these ingredients are adding to the formulation? And this is, I've highlighted a couple of the applications here, two that I just wanted to call out on this slide specifically, where one study was looking at gels that were created from emulsions of inulin, pulse protein concentrates, and seed oils, and they were looking at this to substitute fat in formulation for brioche buns. Another study looked at creating dispersions of pea protein and putting that into a suspension with added zinc. And they compared the bioavailability of zinc that was added alone into a biscuit versus adding a small amount of this pea protein and zinc suspension into that biscuit formulation. And they found that there was a higher cell uptake of zinc compared to when zinc was added alone. And then these other two I'll highlight more specifically here. So there's some studies which have been looking at frozen dough systems. So the idea here is that because of those water hydration properties of pulse ingredients, that they'll decrease the percentage of freezable water, restrict the water redistribution that can result when ice crystals are forming under frozen conditions, and that by doing so, you're limiting the amount of damage that can be done to that dough microstructure during frozen storage that might result in decreases in quality once you bake that final product. So improved product quality has been reported in some studies for both bread dough as well as dumpling wrappers. So I just wanted to highlight here, this was one study which was looking at a pea protein isolate that was used to stabilize a butter and water emulsion, and that emulsion was added in to this frozen dough system. So compared to the control, adding that emulsion helped to reduce the baking loss that was experienced once that dough was baked, as well as help to increase the volume for that dough after baking once it had been stored under frozen conditions. Another area of work, and Tanya kind of mentioned this, is that given the volatility in prices in the egg market, there's a lot of interest in looking at solutions to egg replacements. Pulse ingredients, there's potential here. They offer binding, emulsification, gelation, and browning. So I just wanted to highlight, we worked with Prairie Research Kitchen here in Winnipeg in Canada, just to look at the feasibility of this. So I just wanted to highlight some results from a case study. This is just proof of concept. Didn't do a lot of optimization, just tried it out, see what we got. So I wanted to highlight some of the results from this project. So there's 4 different product categories that I wanted to highlight. The first here is some waffle trials, where overall, just some notes, the addition and the replacement of eggs with pea protein resulted in a more dense batter. It's a little bit less airy, but more of a wet consistency. And then the finished product demonstrated some increased product height, length, increased moisture content, and a slightly darker crust color, but overall was successful. There was a slight detection of a vegetal aftertaste, but overall, the chefs that worked on this thought that this could be overcome simply by, when you add maple syrup to a waffle, you're not typically eating these by themselves. It wouldn't be too noticeable. The other application that was looked at, this is a sponge cake. Where here eggs are responsible for foaming and creating that nice aerated structure. This is one where it didn't work very well. The pea protein wasn't able to foam and stabilize the structure. So as a result, you can see that it was a much more thick batter, that structure collapsed, and there wasn't quite that height gain in the treatments that were the egg replacement trial. So here, some of the suggestions from the research team were to look at, okay, can we just partially replace eggs in formulation moving forward, or look at different types of products like pound cakes or brownies, which are relying a little bit less on that strong aerated structure like sponge cakes are. Here was looking at a chocolate chip cookie application where all of the treatments actually increased the dough strength. So it resulted in something that was a little bit tackier than the control, but you can see if this video is playing well, hopefully it is, some of the differences that actually helped a little bit with some of the transferring and the processing and shaping of the cookies. So it could be a little bit of a benefit in terms of a process, where in the final product here, depending on the treatment, there was some where they looked at mixes of hydrocolloids, some just pea protein alone. There was differences across treatments in terms of spread and height of the cookie, but overall felt that this was successful because they were able to maintain that chewiness and the crispiness of the edges that's characteristic of a cookie. And that there was a slight vegetal note there, but if you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't necessarily detect it. And that you could play around with some masking agents or different flavor additives to really help to mitigate some of those flavor notes. Lastly here, the last application was pastries. So overall, this was quite a successful substitution. Eggs play a lot less of a role in terms of the structure of these products. It's more related to the butter packing that's creating that flaky structure, but they were able to help with the color development there. So you can see that they had similar color relative to the control, nice distinct layering, good browning. There was a slightly higher moisture content in all of the egg-free products, but overall successful. And one of the comments from the chef here that was working on it was that the dough was slightly tougher, and this is something that could potentially be beneficial during mixing and sheeting to help with handling. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up here before I pass it along. And just some conclusions here is that there are a lot of benefits from a nutrition and sustainability perspective that can be gained from formulating with pulse ingredients. And there is a lot of opportunity to optimize the quality through proper selection of ingredients, formulation, and process. And there does seem to be, particularly with some of the protein ingredients, some additional functional opportunities in bakery applications that warrant for future research and investigation. And with that, I'm going to pass things along to Maneka here, and she's going to go a little bit more into detail about screening ingredients and how that relates to the product quality for one application. So I'll pass things up.
Thank you, Janelle. So thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon. Depends where you are. So I'm gonna share some information about a study we completed recently. This is actually reinforcing some of the information shared by Tanya and Janelle, where different chemical attributes and functional attributes of ingredients play a significant role in the end product. So this was one case study where we looked at pan bread, but of course, this can we have ideas to further expand this study, look at other ingredients, etc. So moving along, so we wanted to characterize commercially available protein isolates. So this included structural characterization, functional characterization, and determine how we could include these ingredients in whole grain bakery applications. So in a whole grain system, there's more fiber, which is beneficial. So we wanted to focus on whole grain applications, but it also brings some complexity because whole grain, the fiber in the whole grain can interact with rheological properties, water availability, absorption, etc. So, regardless, our study intended to really look at these protein ingredients and characterize these and identify if any of the structure and function characteristics can be related to specific bakery applications. For example, what type of function or chemical properties are helpful when incorporating these ingredients in bakery applications, specifically pan bread in this case study. So this is one part of the research that we are doing in my lab. So overall, our goal is to develop nutrient dense products from novel ingredients, which includes pulses, underutilized grains, and other nutritious sources. So this fits within that broad theme of what we intend to do. And like I said earlier, we looked specifically at commercially available protein isolates. Okay, so for the protein isolates, we looked at two pea protein isolates and one soy protein isolate. Given that we wanted to systematically look at these isolates in detail, we did protein characterization. We looked at the functional attributes of the protein ingredients. We looked at how incorporating these ingredients at different levels, namely 5, 10, and 15%, has an impact on how the dough behaves or dough rheological properties. And finally, we looked at bread quality and end use quality of the products that we made. We also performed some statistical analysis to see how the protein structure function characteristics fit within the broad frame of end product quality in terms of incorporating protein ingredients or protein isolates in pan bread applications. So our protein isolates had a protein content ranging from 80 to 90%. The pea proteins, uh, the highest was observed in one of the pea protein isolates at 90%. Soy protein had around 80%. You can see the structural characterization that we did. So, in terms of the subunit structure of the ingredients that we were looking at, we didn't necessarily observe significant differences. For example, if you compare the two pea proteins, the banding pattern is more or less similar, meaning that in terms of protein composition, they didn't show significant differences. Of course, this test isn't a qualitative test. We are not looking at numbers. We are visually observing the banding pattern. So if we do more detailed studies, maybe there could be some compositional differences. But from this diagram, we didn't observe any significant compositional differences. And then we looked at denaturation characteristics, which shows how stable the protein ingredient is under heat conditions. As for denaturation temperature, we didn't see any differences between the three samples that we studied. In terms of the enthalpy, soy had a lower enthalpy compared to the pea protein samples that we used in this study. Surface hydrophobicity reflects how likely the protein is to interact with the hydrophobic substance or environment. And in this case, within the 2p protein isolates that we looked at, we found a wide difference. So this emphasizes the fact that it is difficult to characterize ingredients in a very general terms, and we really need to look at the ingredients in detail, although we might be working with similar ingredients in different formulations. So again, we saw a huge difference in the pea protein isolates that we looked at. Solubility also, again, within the pea protein, very big difference. One of the pea proteins showed the lowest, and one of the pea protein isolates showed the highest difference. Foaming characteristics. So foaming, when we talk about foaming, it is important to assess foaming capacity. So how well does it foam, and also foaming stability. So if you look at the data that was found, the samples showed quite a bit of variation in terms of capacity and stability, which further emphasizes the need for extensive characterization of the ingredients that you're working with. So emulsification properties are also important, refers to how well a protein can interact with a hydrophobic phase, and then form an emulsion as well as keep that emulsion stable over time. So again, the ingredients that we looked at, the pea protein ingredients and the SPI, showed quite a bit of variation in this aspect as well. Moving along, in terms of gelling, the soy had the highest gel strength, and pea in general showed lower strength. And also in terms of the minimum gelling concentration, soy gels at at a lower concentration compared to the pea, but we did the analysis at the same concentration for comparison purposes. So like I said, not only did we characterize these protein isolates, we also looked at the impact of incorporating these isolates in dough rheological systems. So first we looked at what we call dough development time, or DDT. So what you see here is compared to the control, upon incorporating the protein ingredients, the dough development time took longer. So it took longer for dough to reach its optimum consistency. And also in terms of stability, so how stable the dough is, um, compared to the control here, the stability was higher upon incorporating the different protein ingredients, and it varied quite a bit depending on the protein isolate itself and the incorporation rate as well. So loaf volume is one of the key characteristics that we consider in pan bread. It really talks about bread quality in terms of consumer acceptance, etc. So in our control, the loaf volume was about 400, and then incorporating these protein ingredients lowered the loaf volume, but at the same time, some of the decrease in loaf volume varied quite a bit between ingredients. So if you look at PPI, sorry, the first pea protein isolate at 5%, it was around 322. And if you look at the second pea protein isolate at 5%, it was around 300. So again, between ingredients, there were variations as well. And these are some of the images that we took. You can see that the control has very good loaf structure. The appearance looks good. It's symmetrical, etc. But when you look at the bread loaves with protein ingredients incorporated, you can see that it appears to be a lot more dense, and then the loaf volume, especially at higher incorporation rates, were much less than the control. So bringing this all together, we performed a principal component analysis. So in terms of what the results mean, we can say that dimension 1, which you can see, is positively associated with foaming stability, emulsion stability, solubility, and gelling concentration. And then in terms of the dimension 2, it was highly positively associated with surface hydrophobicity and gelation. And then depending on the on the data we received for these characteristics, from with reference to the protein ingredients that we characterize, these were placed in different quadrants, meaning that they are very different in terms of their physicochemical properties and functionality. We continued this analysis at the different incorporation rates of the protein ingredients, and as you can see, what our data shows is that there was wide variation between the different protein isolates that we looked at the different concentration or inclusion levels. So, in terms of the overall take of the data that we have so far, we can say that these protein ingredients need to be characterized really well before they are being used in different applications. Not only do you need to see how well they perform in the dough and in the bread, it is helpful to characterize the structure and functional attributes, so that that can be used as a screening tool if you have a wide range of ingredients and you want to select which one would work best. In our study, we found promising outcomes for the different isolates for the soy and the pea as well, but usually at the 5 to 10% incorporation rate. And this is in line with what Janelle just mentioned, that usually the incorporation rate of 5 to 10% works well with protein ingredients in bakery applications. So with that, we are coming to a close for our time. I will wrap up. So there are some ongoing projects in my lab. We are looking at pulse ingredients in frozen doughs, whole grain refrigerated and frozen dough, food safety aspects, etc. Um, the case study I just mentioned, we are hoping to publish that soon. But if you would like to connect me with any of the data or any of the analysis that were performed, I am happy to connect with you on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maneka and Janelle and Tanya. We're going to bring everybody back up here, and we just have a very limited amount of time to tackle some of the questions. So we'll go with the ones that were most upvoted and of interest to others. And so we do have a couple of questions on flavor. So I think that's something really important for us to talk about. So I think we can probably answer both of these questions in one. So the first one was out of curiosity. Pulse often comes with beanie aroma off flavor that sometimes is not desired. How can it be tackled when incorporating pulse flour to bakery products? But then another maybe more broader question about are there methods to mitigate undesirable aromas?
Yes, I can take a stab there. There's a lot of different strategies. It ranges anywhere from there's some treatments available. One of the big sources of off flavors is an enzyme called lipoxygenase. So oftentimes a heat treatment can inactivate that enzyme, and it reduces the amount of volatiles that are generated from the degradation of free fatty acids in the flours. So just heat treatment alone is something that's commonly used commercially across the board. There are other strategies at the bakery level. So I even see in the comments here, there's some companies that offer flavor masking solutions. We've worked a lot with a chef who's very good at complementary flavors. So even not necessarily having to use maskers, but just leaning into some of the notes that you find that are desirable in some of the pulse ingredients. So I'll shout out Christine at iHeart Food Consulting. She's done some really, really good products, leveraging some complementary flavors for like seeds, other types of flours, that you can overall just make a good tasting product without having to really worry about leaning away from the pulse category. And there's some interesting research even as well, looking at mixing and the addition, at what time do you add fats into the mixing process, because you're introducing oxygen, causing oxidation, potentially degrading some of the acids that are resulting in the generation of volatiles. So looking at how to optimize just at what time do you add ingredients, process adjustments. There's lots and lots of strategies out there. So we also, I'll note, we have a online on-demand course that you can sign up for free, that has a whole host of videos from different researchers in North America that's looking at ways to mitigate flavor. So I would highly encourage anyone who's just interested in flavor and understanding the science behind it to check that course out. It's free. There's a ton of lots of information there as well. So long-winded answer, but there's lots that can be done.
Yeah, it looks like we have a button up there now, just a link to more information on that course, and we'll be sure to include that in the follow-up for everyone attending. So let's move to this next question that got a lot of interest. So which pulse flour would have the lowest impact to the color as a partial replacement for wheat flour in baked products? So that's the first question, and then maybe we'll tackle the second part of that.
Like a lot of it will come down to what's the color of the pulse type. And it also just depending on the application. So something like a red lentil, you might get some of those red hues, versus something like a white navy bean, which is very clear in color. You're going to get less of those just natural pigments from the seed. Things that are a little bit lower in protein might react less in the Maillard reaction during baking. So you might get a little bit less of that darker color formation, but you can adjust there. I had shown a couple of examples of looking at the baking time and temperature to minimize some of that. But a lot of it, if you just look at what's the color of the flour, that can tell you a lot.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll take, I want to just touch on the second part of that question, but that's a good closing question, I think, to wrap things up. But what about this next question? This also got upvoted. Just why do North Americans seem so hesitant? Is it raw material cost or other? Does anyone have any comments on that?
Yeah, I would like to comment on that. I think it's not so much about being hesitant, because the results did show that consumers there was high consideration for pea protein based breads, for instance, but there was indicating some low current demand, and there could be many reasons, from really simply supply demand. There's a bit of a chicken and egg, and so I think it is positive because there is an openness by consumers to buy and eat these type of products, and so. But I guess from a food industry perspective, like there could also be reasons why companies might, it takes time to launch products that are on point, and there could be, a lot of functionality questions that come up. There's regulatory barriers that could exist in terms of positioning products from a protein perspective, for instance. And flavor, so there's lots of reasons, and so I think it's really just a matter of time. Pastas and snack products with pea protein, for instance, are kind of there's demand, there's products in the market, and so with breads, I think it's the next kind of emerging category where consumers are starting to really see them on the shelves and wanting to buy them. So it's niche but growing.
Great. And then let's just take this last part here as a good closer. So do you have a resource site to allow for a more detailed comparison of different physical properties of the pulse ingredients? So I think there's a few different, resources and things in the works on that. Do you want to maybe touch on that, Janelle?
Yeah, so we do have one study that we're just wrapping up. This was a collaboration with NRC and CGC. So what we did is we took 27 commercial pulse proteins, characterize them for nutrition functionality. I think one of the challenges when you're looking at a database is that when you're using different methods, you can't necessarily compare the value. They're not going to be directly comparable. So you almost need to do it within the same lab. Or I've also seen a couple new innovative approaches, which are looking at maybe AI modeling to try to understand some of the variances in data and the background noise that might exist between methods, and then developing a big data set. So I think there's stuff in the works. Like groups like Maneka's lab, I think at U of M too, can will have all of this data from the studies that they're working on as well, and can provide some insights.
For sure.
But that, yeah, so there's stuff in the works for sure. I don't know if you
Yeah,
want to
and
comment.
we also have underway, work to do some nutritional analysis of various ingredients in the marketplace broadly, and pull that into a database so it's easier to understand, like sort of the range that exists out there. But we do have a lot of resources at Pulse Canada. We have a Pulse Flour hub that we'll be sending out to all the participants, and you can access a lot more information on Pulse flours and applications there. We've just put that up on the screen here, and we'll send that out to everyone, as well as this online flavor course. So with that, I'm going to close out our session today. I just want to again thank you all for attending. I hope that the information was of value for you, and thank you to our presenters today for sharing their expertise and pulling together the information. If you want to reach out to anyone on our staff, and we can also put you in touch with Maneka, please feel free to do that. We're happy to answer any questions that we weren't able to get to today. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.